It's my pleasure to present to you our speaker for this evening. LaTricea Adams is a proud native of Memphis, Tennessee, and is the founder, CEO, and president of Young, Gifted, and Green, a national environmental justice and civil rights organization with the purpose of bringing like-minded organizations together to collectively take action and advocate against the crisis of lead exposure and environmental injustice in disadvantaged communities. LaTricea was the youngest African American woman appointed to President Biden's White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, where she served as co chair of the executive order on revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all working group, as well as the co chair for the Carbon Management Working Group. She's also a member of the American Public Health Association's National Council for Environmental Health and Equity. LaTricea is the former president of the Memphis and Greater Washington Urban League Young Professionals and a former member of the American Bar Association's Environmental Justice Task Force, the first ever and current chair of the Shelby County Lead Prevention and Sustainability Commission, a member of the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation's Water Infrastructure Advisory Committee, and Shelby County Emissions Reduction Planning Advisory Committee. Ms. Adams is also a board member of the board of directors for Protect Our Aquifer. Prior to LaTricia's career in environment, she served 16 years as a K-12 public school educator and district administrator. She was also honored as the Child Health Advocate of the Year by the Children's Environmental Health Network, the University of Memphis Black Alumni Memphis State 8 awardee, and many other accolades. LaTricea is also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. LaTricea Adams.
Thank you so much, Eric. First, I'm so excited to have this opportunity just to share a bit about something that I'm super passionate about. Is about our water, but most importantly, the implications around lead exposure that impacts our water system. So I am going to pull up my slide here. So just to go over some of the talking points for this evening. So first, I'll talk a little bit more about who we are as an organization. And thank you so much for that warm welcome where you got a chance to learn a little bit about me, but I'll just delve a little bit deeper into who we are as an organization and why the history of why we got started is so important to what we'll discuss this evening. And then I hope we'll be able to do something that's a little interactive to really think and reflect on, is my drinking water at risk of lead? Then we'll speak about how does lead actually get into our drinking water? And then we'll focus a bit more from a local perspective about the status of lead in drinking water in Memphis. And then I will be remiss not to go into a little bit of policy to talk about the most recent updates to EPA's lead and copper rule. Another piece of legislation that was actually introduced by our very own Congressman Cohen, which is the Home Lead Safety Tax Credit Act of 2024, which will also be reintroduced in this current congressional session. And then we'll go into what are the public health implications surrounding lead exposure, and then we'll wrap up with what can we do about this issue, and then we'll lead into a bit of Q&A. So first, who are we? Who is Young, Gifted, and Green? So I wanted to start by giving a little bit of brief historical context. So as you heard in my bio, I spent the majority of my life, my adult life, as a K-12 educator. I was a middle school and high school teacher and then moved on very shortly. I was an assistant principal, but spent the bulk of that time working in district leadership. So around 2015 is when I personally learned about the Flint water crisis. At that particular time, I actually was living in Washington, D.C. And while there are a myriad of things that negatively impact communities as it relates to environment, being from a place like Memphis, where my entire life, our water had been lauded as one of the greatest in the world, not even just in the nation, with having a natural sand aquifer, it just really disturbed my spirit to learn that, you know, in modern times that we would have an entire city that was poisoned by our most precious gift, or one of our most precious gifts, which is water. So during that time, what literally just started as a community outreach and a community service initiative through the Greater Washington Urban League Young Professionals grew into this whole movement. So the very first thing that we did in response to the Flint water crisis is like when many people did, we did a water donation drive. Once upon a time, millennials were the youngest kids on the block. I still think I'm a little bit youthful, but at that time, we really were the youngest generation. And it was a little bit of frustration that, from a civil rights perspective at the time, with the exception of the NAACP, there had not been enough prioritization and focus on what was going on with the Flint water crisis. But then we later learned that it wasn't just an isolated event or occurrence with lead service line issues in Flint, Michigan, but there are Flint, Michigans, if you will, all across the nation. And so in February 10th to be exact, in 2016, I did a national call, used social media that pretty much said, can anyone join this call to figure out what can be some strategies that we can implement to quickly wrap our arms around Flint, Michigan? And so that's when we came up with the original name, which is Black Millennials for Flint. People always ask, where did you all come up with that name? It was so straightforward. That literally was who was on the call. There were African American young people who were really rallying around to support Flint, Michigan. And so we actually did our first service trip to Flint in partnership with the National Urban League, which we were really excited about at the time. And we also brought with us some youth from Washington, D.C., because remember, I still worked for the district and worked closely with our schools. And I would say maybe about 2 to 3 weeks after we returned back from this service trip in Flint, the very children that traveled with us got notices sent home from school that there was lead in their school drinking water. So in millennial fashion, I was very upset, and I actually testified against my employer at the time because the district was actually knowledgeable of some issues surrounding water quality. And so from that moment, still like really just upset and hurt about what was going on in Flint, Michigan, but to learn that our children in our nation's capital was experiencing things that were very similar, we pivoted as a organization, and I say that loosely because we were just literally a group of concerned citizens, and we actually got our first bill passed. It's lengthy. It's called the DC Lead Prevention Amendment Act of 2017. And so this bill called for the mandatory testing of lead in school drinking water. It was among one of the first bills to be passed in the country. At the time and currently, it was not a federal mandate. And there were very few states, and of course, in this instance, DC is not a state that had issued such a requirement from a statewide perspective. We were able to use that model to get the same bill or similar bills passed in the state of Michigan, in the state of Maryland, and in our home state, in Tennessee, where a similar bill was passed by our former state senator, Lee Harris, who is now our county mayor. So moving forward into 2016, again, lead issues are not pervasive just in Flint, Michigan, not in DC, but across the country. But we expanded to DC officially in 2016. And then in 2017, we expanded our work into Baltimore and Memphis. And then we also adopted a national policy strategy as well. So you see here in this map, these are also some of the places where we've had an opportunity to engage directly with communities on the ground, whether it be with support around policy advocacy. Our mission and vision has also since expanded. So beyond just our niche area, which is around lead poisoning prevention in all of its forms, whether it be in water, consumer products, housing, as well as soil. These are some of the other places from around the country in which we also have a touch point. So that is a bit of history about who we are as an organization, how everything got started. It was definitely not on my bingo card that I would be leading an environmental justice organization, but was very much so obedient to the next chapter in my life and what I've selected to dedicate my life to. So I want to pause here. So I wanted to do something a little bit interactive. I want to see if I could actually see the chat box. So this is a quiz here where essentially, and I'll just go back in just a second so I can see the comments in the chat box. But essentially, I want you to just take a few minutes or maybe a few seconds to reflect on some of these questions to really determine, is your current drinking water at risk of lead? So the first question is, what is the age of your home? So A, built before 1986, B, built between 1986 and 2000, and then C, built after 2000. So take some time to think through what the age of your home is. You might have to do a roundabout estimate. I will say that the housing stock in Memphis in particular, we have some significantly older homes, especially when you think about, for example, Midtown, parts of South Memphis and Orange Mound. Also, North Memphis is where you will find a significant amount of older housing stock. And then, of course, within the parkways as well, those beautiful historical homes, very pretty, very old. Meaning that they will be a bit more susceptible to having old fixtures inside of the home. Um, this next question is, do you have lead pipes or plumbing fixtures? You may not know. So you may know for certain, then you will select A, yes. You might not be sure, that's okay. B, and then no, like confirmed, like you do not have any lead pipes or plumbing fixtures inside of the home, that would be C. And then three, have you recently had plumbing work done in your home? The reason why that's really important. So let's say, for example, in the previous question where it asked, do you have lead pipes or plumbing fixtures? If your answers were yes, or you were unsure, the issue is if you do have lead plumbing, so that would be like in your water fixtures and the actual like pipes inside of the home, whether it be in the kitchen, also in the bathroom as well. If you disturb any of those pipes internally, it could cause disruption to the actual pipe itself if it does have lead, and it could potentially leach water into your drinking water directly from the tap from the source. So just wanted to give some context around how those particular questions were interconnected. And then the next question, have you ever noticed discolored water or water that has a little bit of a metallic taste? I do want to give some context. Sometimes with discolored water, that does not implicate or automatically mean that you have lead in your water. There may be issues with rust. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have lead in your drinking water. Key thing to know about lead, especially if it is dissolved in water, is highly soluble. It does not have color. Now, as far as taste, now if you had access to like a lead paint chip or like dust, it does taste sweet, but typically if it's in water, you really can't taste it. But you have your options there for answers. And then the last question, have you tested your water for lead? So yes, it was positive. B, yes, it was negative. Or no, you have not had your home tested for lead. So I want to pause to see if anyone, and it's no pressure with answering these questions, but just really wanted to give you some time and space just to reflect on your own drinking water sources right within your home. So we're going to cheat. We have a little bit of an answer key here. So essentially if you answer A on any of these respective questions, then you would get a point. You would get 3 points. If you answered B for any questions, 2 points, and one, you would, and for option C, you would get 1 point. So essentially, if you had a total score of points that was 10 to 15 points, is more of a lower risk with your water potentially having lead. 16 to 20 is moderate risk. If you went 21 and above, you probably want to get someone to take a look or get your water tested. You may have a higher risk of lead being in your water. I wanted to frame this because I wanted, if nothing else from tonight's webinar, is with lead exposure, particularly lead in school drinking water, it shows no favorites, right? So literally depending on the age of your home, where your home is located, there's a myriad of different reasons that puts your home or could put your home at risk. So it's really important to just be safe and just to know for sure what the status is of your water quality in your home. So moving to the next item is, how does lead actually get into your drinking water? So I talked about this a little bit with some of the questions. So with lead pipes and plumbing, probably the most known way that we know about lead getting into leaching, getting into your drinking water is from lead actually leaching from a lead pipe or from lead service lines. These are the service lines that exist underground. So if you see in this photo over here, it's a little bit small. So one key thing to note as it relates to lead service lines, there's two parts of the line. You have the public side. The public side of the line is the part where you see here, oops, where's my cursor? There we go. Down here we see main water line. So this is the part of the line that is maintained by your local water provider. In this instance, it will be Memphis Light Gas and Water. On the other side of the line, which is the private side of the line, that's the responsibility of the homeowner. Now, a key thing that I want to note that is very specific to Memphis, Memphis is a highly renter city, meaning that we have a significant proportion of residents in the city of Memphis that don't own their home. And so that becomes a challenge when, for example, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, when there are programs that either discount or allow for free full service line replacement. If you don't own the property, then you can't consent. But there is two sides of the line. There are instances, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, where with service lines, it could be lead on one side and not the other. It could be lead on both sides. It could be an instance where it's really unknown. But essentially, lead pipes is one of the most common ways in which lead can leach into drinking water. Also, I mentioned earlier around plumbing. So with indoor plumbing, and this kind of connects down here at the bottom with solder, so lead solder. So historically, lead solder was used in our indoor water infrastructure. So if you live in a home that is significantly old, has not been modernized, that does still have some significantly outdated plumbing, it could be possible that those particular pipes, plumbing inside of the home could be leaching lead at the source, meaning it would be leaching at the actual tap. And then also this part around corrosive water is really important. So I mentioned my entry point into this work was around the Flint water crisis. So what was very unique about the Flint water crisis, which exacerbated it and made it the crisis that it still is, because it's still not fixed, is that the proper anti-corrosives was not applied to the drinking water. So there is something that you can add into your drinking water system that acts as an anti-corrosive, where it's almost like a coating, where in those instances where you do have lead service lines that services your city, with these anti-corrosives that's added to your drinking water, it lessens the risk of lead leaching from those lead service lines. Now, it's not 100%. There are instances where even if you do treat the water with anti-corrosives, lead can still leach. But in this particular instance with Flint, Michigan, that's very unique to Flint, is that anti-corrosive was not added. And they switched their water source from the Detroit water system to the Flint River. If you know anything about Flint, their vehicle city, there had been illegal dumping for decades in the Flint River. It was highly corrosive, just really dirty, nasty, for lack of better terms, water. And so just think about like how egregious it was to take that water source and use it for drinking water and not add the appropriate treatment. So in those instances where anti-corrosives are not used, then that does put your drinking water at risk. Now, rest assured, in Memphis, and Shelby County, so in the municipalities as well, they do very diligently use anti-corrosives in our drinking water. Of course, like with aging infrastructure, that's a big part of the issue throughout the United States. So this is not just an issue specific to Memphis, but we have old pipes. Memphis is an old city. We literally have pipes in ground that are from the 1800s that have never been replaced. And so, of course, what I mentioned earlier, when you have older housing stock in a particular community, chances are that that underground water infrastructure is also significantly old and aging, and at this point just simply needs to be replaced. All right, so bringing it very specific to my beloved hometown in Memphis. So, what's the status of drinking water in Memphis? So, Memphis, like many other cities across the United States, had a long history with issues surrounding water quality with lead service lines. Now, I don't want to scare anybody that's listening today. Just because you have lead service lines, interestingly enough, it doesn't automatically mean that lead is leaching in your water, but it definitely increases the risk. There are thousands of lead service lines that exist within the city of Memphis. MLGW, particularly under the leadership of fairly new now, I think he's gotten his feet wet with President McGowan, has really prioritized lead service line replacement and identifying where those lead service lines are within the city. I'll speak about this a little bit more, but there was also a federal mandate that came through the Environmental Protection Agency, which did mandate that water providers located these lead service lines within their service base. So again, not to be repetitive, we also have a significant older housing stock in Memphis as well, where there are also indoor plumbing issues that could also have issues with lead. So, some of the mitigation efforts that Memphis Light Gas and Water has implemented, and I'll go into a bit more detail here shortly. So, they have implemented a pilot of a lead service line replacement program where this will be the full replacement of a line. So, just to quickly go back, remember when I mentioned that there's two sides of the line? You have the main water line side, which is the public side, and then you have the private side or the residential side. So technically, especially when you talk about money and resources, historically, Memphis Light Gas and Water and just water utility providers across the country were only responsible for the public side of the line. But the issue is if you do one side and not the other, that's a big no-no, and it actually causes more issues than it would be if you just left the line intact. So for example, if you just cut the line and leave a lead service line on the residential side and then only replace it on the public side, that means that the side of the line that's connected right to the residents still has lead. If you cut it, that means now that you have disturbed significantly that line, making it more likely for lead to leach into water. So essentially with this pilot and with some funding that came from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, MLGW has some pilot funds, if you will, to start to look at what it looks like to actually do full service line replacements for MLGW customers. Also, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, is they have updated what's called their lead service line inventory. So essentially with this lead service line inventory, you can type in any address within the city of Memphis, and it tells you what the status is of your service line. Now, there are some instances, and we'll see an example where it's unknown. if you do have a water line that's showing up as unknown, you can actually do a water testing kit for free. And you can coordinate with MLGW where they can work with you to determine whether or not you have a lead service line. I mentioned earlier that MLGW is very diligent with ensuring that the appropriate corrosion control, or the anti-corrosives are added into our drinking water sources. So we don't have to worry about a Flint, Michigan happening in Memphis. There is due diligence to ensure that those appropriate treatments are provided. And then I mentioned as well where there has been a significant concerted effort to ensure that MLGW is doubling down on making sure that there is distribution of information and education about lead service lines as well. So in this photo here, some of the things that we do as an organization is we do old school door knocking. So since 2017, we have prioritized frontline communities. So those would be communities like South Memphis, specifically the Riverside community, North Memphis, so that would be Hyde Park, the Douglas community, and Orange Mound as well, where we literally use the MLGW inventory map to determine what are the specific homes that have either unknown or confirmed lead service lines. And we literally go knock on the door of those residents and say, hey, did you know that you had a lead service line? And then we provide them additional information about how to get their water tested. We even also provide an opportunity for there to be a lead paint dust assessment as well, where we care about lead in all of its forms, right? But for all intents and purposes of this tonight's conversation, we do focus on ensuring that residents are knowledgeable about their status of their service line, and what the next steps are for remediation. So there's been a significant amount of advocacy, not just led by Young, Gifted, and Green, but from a host of community-based organizations. A key partner in this work has been Protect Our Aquifer, where they are just phenomenal in making sure that we have no breaches of any type of contaminant that puts our aquifer at risk. We also have been in partnership with the Sierra Club, Memphis Community Against Pollution, actually a maternal health and reproductive health organization, Sister Reach, La Bonner, the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, a myriad of concerned citizens and organizations who essentially came together to provide some recommendations in 2023 to MLGW. So this is a bit of a report card, still got my teacher hat on. And so just quickly, these are some of the recommendations and then like what the progress status is of that. So one of the recommendations to MLGW was to develop a community-led service line replacement community advisory. It's somewhat in progress. So a couple of months ago, MLGW did host a community roundtable where he invited all of the organizations that were part of that community letter, where they gave updates to us about their new pilot program. We also asked MLGW to provide a 10-year lead service line cost analysis. This is extremely expensive. And while the federal government has offset kind of like the startup funding for lead service line replacement, it is going to have to take a significant amount of funding, both at the local level and the state level, to be able to reach this 10-year mandate. So MLGW did their due diligence where they did do a pretty robust cost analysis. So they are on track with that recommendation. I mentioned earlier that they updated their inventory map. They have moved leaps and bounds with how interactive and how much more information they've included in this updated map. Also with notification to all MLGW customers who have either confirmed or unknown lead service lines. So they did send out letters. I'll show you what those images look like with those postcards. So they are on track. And then the last two things are in progress. So one is they have to ask for funding But then one thing in particular, we really need more support for MLGW to provide filters. So out of the thousands of notifications that they had to send to MLGW customers that they have lead service lines, there has to be more education about what protective measures should exist in the interim as they think about like how they will approach full service line replacement. And then the other component actually is a call to not MLGW, but to city council. So I mentioned earlier with there being a bit of a hurdle as it relates to renters. So in the instance, for example, when they pilot this full service line replacement, they won't be able to extend that to renters who are among some of our most vulnerable residents and MLGW customers. So the onus is on city council to think about what that looks like from a policy perspective to ensure that our most vulnerable community members who may be renters are not excluded from these services. So I'll go through this fairly quickly, and I hope that I'll be able to get this distributed to everyone that joins post webinar. But these are literally some of the images and some of the information that's pulled from the MLGW website. So they give you a summary of what their lead service line inventory project entails. And then it also has information if you want to do self-reporting as well. Then you have the inventory map that's on their new website as well, where you can see here, this is where you would actually type in an address and then it will populate the status from that particular address. Also, it has information about how you can order a testing kit for free. They got a handy dandy phone number that you can call. You can also do an email request as well. Oh, and then one quick thing, I mentioned earlier about the anti-corrosive. So you see here where it says MLGW will continue treating your water with phosphate as a first line of defense. So just making sure that they are educating the general public about what they add to ensure that anti-corrosives are being used with fidelity. So these are some of the different communications or postcards, if you will, that went to MLGW customers. There are different types of cards, and you'll see that each of them have different messaging. So with this went out to customers that had unknown lead service lines. And this next example here, and I like that they use different imagery, so that really helps to distinguish between the different types of notifications that went out. And this particular notification, this would be for a resident that has a confirmed lead service line, and it's also on either or both sides of the line. Wanted to take that into consideration as well. And then galvanized lines also have to be replaced as well. So this is the notification that went out to those MLGW customers that have confirmed galvanized service lines as well. So also in the inventory map, and this is one of our big recommendations, and we were so excited that they included it. This is actually a structure that was adopted from DC Water. So once upon a time, when you went into the previous lead service line inventory, it only showed you what existed on the MLGW side of the line. So now moving forward, they actually give you indication of what exists on both sides of the line. So we see here the MLGW side, and then on the other opposing side is the customer side. And so then also on the inventory map, they have a legend and a breakdown of symbols where we have color codes: green for non-lead. Lead has the black and white, not black and white, excuse me, black and yellow stripes here. Galvanized is blue. And then unknown, it looks black. It could also be extremely dark blue, but I'm going to go with black. Also, here is the website where you can access all of this information that I'm sharing this evening. So I used an example from the actual lead service line inventory. So I actually chose the church that I grew up in. My maternal family is actually from Texas. So my great grandparents, when they arrived to Memphis. They lived in South Memphis in the Riverside community. And so my entire family, on both sides, my parents were married at this church. My grandparents were married at this church. My uncle and aunt were married at this church. And as you can see, when I put in this address, this is actually unknown. But let's take a look around this church, right? So this is on East Macklemore. So you have confirmed lead on one side, on literally almost the entire street. You have a significant amount of unknowns. You definitely see more black and yellow than you see green. Now you see some green like a bit further across the street and up the block, but we see that we have an issue here. I would be remiss not to acknowledge that we think about this from a socioeconomic perspective. This particular community is largely African American, low income community, and has been for a significant amount of time. This community is also historically redlined as well. So those things do play a part when we talk about disparities around water quality, particularly as it relates to lead service lines. So this is also some information that's accessible online as well. If you visit this website, I won't read this to you. So I want to shift gears a little bit and speak specifically to lead as it exists in our schools' drinking water. Now, I wanted to use this as an example. So even though in the previous example, when we looked at this inventory, this was in South Memphis where we have a significant amount of lead service lines. But remember I said earlier, there are no favorites. There are no people that can be automatically exempt from issues surrounding lead service lines and lead in drinking water. So back in 2022, in one of the most affluent communities in Shelby County, Germantown, actually had some issues where there were elevated lead levels that was found in their school drinking water. Um, and so I mentioned, or in my bio, it mentioned this entity called the Shelby County Lead Prevention and Sustainability Commission. So with County Mayor Lee Harris in his first term and continuation of his advocacy that he did while serving as a state senator, he really wanted to not just get a bill passed on lead service line, excuse me, not lead service line replacement, for testing for lead in school drinking water, but ensure that that work was being done with fidelity. And so one of the tasks with the Shelby County Lead Prevention and Sustainability Commission, this commission is mayoral recommended and county confirmed, meaning that the mayor actually makes the recommendation for appointees, and then those appointees are confirmed by county commission. So this commission has been standing since 2019. So this is just a screenshot of the reports that we are required to do based on the resolution that established this commission. And so I use Memphis Shelby County Schools. Now, they have not always been in the green. I will say that since this commission has existed, we have successfully diplomatically pushed the district to be more transparent and to really implement this bill with fidelity. Now, I will be forthcoming and say that Memphis Shelby County Schools are the most transparent. We have absolutely no information about what exists with any of the municipalities, not a single one. I also would say that Memphis Shelby County Schools charter schools are also included in some of these achievements that exist with them implementing this bill with fidelity. You can go to the Shelby County Lead Prevention and Sustainability Commission to look at all of the archive reports to see what the status is around all schools, all districts, whether it be the municipal schools or Memphis Shelby County schools. So next, going into EPA's lead and copper rule improvements. So a lot of these different I guess like actions that you've seen largely from MLGW was actually a mandate that came through the Biden-Harris administration through what's called the lead and copper rule improvements. Now, the lead and copper rule was first established back in 1991 during the Clinton administration. So clearly it's been well over 30 years. So there's been significant changes over time. However, it had been a really long time till we got to this point where with this administration, they were very firmly to say once and for all, we got to get the lead out. So with this new rule, one of the most monumental aspects of that is that there's a deadline. So all water utility providers have to replace lead pipes within 10 years. Some of the testing protocols have become a bit more rigid. And another big win is the threshold for remediation. So once upon a time, it was at 15 parts per billion. That was the threshold for remediation, and now that has gone to 10. We do recognize that there's no safe level of lead, but it's a marathon and not a sprint. I'll just say that. Also, it did explicitly focus on community outreach and communication strategies about informing residents. And so that's why you saw where MLGW notified all customers that were impacted. Also, in this new rule, there are implications around public health. This particular update to this rule calls on the health department to essentially do their job with educating the general public about the harm that's associated with lead exposure. Historically, health departments focused a lot on lead paint and didn't really touch on issues surrounding lead in drinking water, but that has changed with this new mandate. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the federal government put money up for this, largely through the bipartisan infrastructure law. There are some instances where some of the Inflation Reduction Act funds are being earmarked for that as well. Now, this is something that actually came in yesterday. Oh boy. So, all of these years of work around getting the lead and copper rule improvement done, literally yesterday, there is a legislator, a congressman out of Alabama, that introduced a resolution to essentially dismantle and disapprove the current lead and copper rule improvements. We anticipate there probably will likely be a lot of pushback from local communities, even from like mayors, utility providers, because not only is this improving our water quality, but it also provides a lot of jobs, right? So if these mandates are cut, then what does that say to the general public where we know for certain that this is a pervasive issue that's impacting the entire nation? So, oh boy, stay tuned on what that may entail with this particular bill. It just comes in piping hot literally from yesterday. Also, bringing us closer to home, Congressman Cohen introduced in 2024, where this is a new congressional session, so it'll have to be reintroduced again, what's called the Homeland Safety Tax Credit Act of 2024. So essentially with this bill, it's a little bit broad, but that's on purpose, where it incentivizes homeowners and landlords to engage in lead remediation efforts. And it could include lead service line replacement as well. So when I talked about earlier about some of the issues with renters and not being able to give consent with replacement on the private side, a lot of times renters are afraid to get their water tested because they're afraid that whoever owns the property may go up on their rent, may evict them, may do any type of retaliatory action. So this incentivizes or would potentially incentivize those homeowners and property owners to actually do that replacement. And they have, of course, like some type of a rebate structure that could potentially be applied. So kudos to Congressman Cohen on those efforts. So moving into this next section, so some of the public implications around lead exposure. So we spent a lot understanding like Where does the lead come from? How does it get into the water? What are some of the policy implications for lead service lines? But the bottom line is, how does it impact humans? How does it impact human beings? So this particular piece of research is just so chilling. So a team of researchers at Wayne State University in Michigan discovered that mothers with high levels of lead in their blood not only affect the fetal cells of their unborn children, but their grandchildren. So to put this in more context, so let's say, for example, you're with child and you are pregnant with a baby girl. That baby girl already has like her ovaries. If you, as the mother, even if you were a child, let's say, for example, you feel perfectly fine, you're not lead poisoned, but you have been exposed to lead. Lead doesn't stay in your bloodstream forever. Some of it is actually exits the body. If there is some lead that still remains in the body, it's deposited in your bones and even in your teeth. When you're pregnant, your bones get a little bit porous. So that lead that had been deposited or may have been deposited in your bones could be re-released back into the bloodstream and can go straight to that growing baby. And not only would it impact the growing baby, it could impact the growing baby's eggs. And then it literally can become issues from generation to generation. There's some other implications around some of the symptoms around lead exposure as well. So issues surrounding cognitive ability, health problems, which we'll talk about this briefly here later, crime, particularly violent crime, mental health issues, um, employment issues because of some of these health issues and other cognitive disabilities. There's a litany of issues that exist due to chronic lead exposure. And then just for the sake of time, just some other high points to hit on as it relates to implications for public health. So neurological effects, so like developmental delay, other learning disabilities. There's also been instances where extremely lead exposed children and adults experience issues around speech development from a birth perspective, from birth outcomes. It does have implications about a growing fetus. Lead exposure can lead to miscarriage. It can also lead to other issues around childbirth, organ damage, so damage to your liver, to your kidneys, to your heart. I mentioned earlier reproductive organs. Also, this is really interesting. Maternal lead exposure, meaning that lead that goes down from generation to generation, passed on from the mother, can also make you at risk of obesity and is intergenerational. And then also, there are issues around, and I actually forgetting the name of this particular issue surrounding pregnancy, but there's a lot of issues and complications that come about from lead exposure as it relates to pregnant people. All right, so leading into this last part, because I do want to quickly make sure that I have time for Q&A. So what can we do? So back in the last state legislative session, Young Gifted and Green worked with Senator Lamar, where we introduced a bill that would make it mandatory for blood lead level screenings for incoming kindergartners. So it's one thing to, we got the mandate done from a federal level to actually get the lead service lines replaced, but what about our babies, our children that had already been exposed to lead? So the bill didn't pass, but it wasn't a horrible loss. So it failed in committee. However, there were some bipartisan interest in this bill. What killed the bill was an erroneous fiscal note, which we hope can be resolved as this bill will be introduced again in this new legislative session. I know Wolf Conservancy also has an event coming up from MLK Day. It's going to be a busy day, this a busy weekend. We also will do our annual MLK edition of our South Memphis canvassing that'll take place this Saturday, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. In South Memphis in the Riverside community. We're really excited about the host of partners that we have this year. And so with that, I want to stop. I said a whole lot of stuff tonight, but we'll open it up for any questions that may have come up from the viewers and listeners tonight. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, LaTricea. That was just a really wonderfully informing presentation. And I guess I'm waiting for some questions to come up from our viewers, but the one that I thought of is, I'm wondering, since lead is so clearly bad for everyone, I can't imagine what the rationale is for the congressman opposing the bill. Do you know why? What is the reason behind opposing?
I can make an inference because I don't want to, disparage or speak on behalf of this particular congressman. There have been some pushback from some water utility providers where they don't think that it's feasible to get this done within a decade. So that could be one thing. The other thing is funding. So with funding, one, even though the federal government gave a portion of the funding, it is going to take a big investment at the state level and the local level. So some of the money, for example, in the state of Tennessee will come from state revolving funds. So state revolving funds, particularly around drinking water, has been around for a while, but there had not been specificity around lead service line replacement. Literally last year was the first time in the history of state revolving funds in Tennessee that water utility providers actually applied the first time. So there are some growing pains where there is some learning that has to happen at the state for them to figure out how do they do that, like with state revolving funds. That doesn't necessarily mean that you got to just completely throw the whole thing out, just kind of figure it out, right? And then the third thing that I would say that's still connected back to funding, we have limited contractors and people that are skilled to actually do the replacement. So this is not just where this particular congressional member is from Alabama. This is a national issue where we don't have a lot of plumbers, but even when you have plumbers, you still have to have a special skill set to be able to do a service line replacement. So I'll just be transparent. Even right now, MLGW had to do a rebid on this pilot because they couldn't find people who had the right skill set and even wanted to even apply, right, for that bid. So there's a lot of things, that are at play. I still think that was really harsh to just completely gut and take out this new rule. Even though there's a 10-year mandate, there's still 2 years kind of cushion for EPA to figure out what this is going to look like, for states to kind of figure out what it's going to look like. And then of course at the local level for them to kind of get their footing and try some things out to get their, cities and municipalities ready. But really, I guess short answer, money is likely the culprit around where there may be some resistance with this bill being introduced.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So I'll keep asking questions I can think of until I'm hoping some folks will add a question. So I have an older home, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers do too. But in going through your quiz, if I added correctly, I seem to be low risk. But I'm wondering, that doesn't completely make me comfortable. So what would be my next step if I wanted to make sure I don't have lead in my drinking water? What would I do?
Yeah, so if you are serviced by MLGW, I would say request a water testing kit. So they really provide like good customer service. So they'll send you the kit. If you want them to, they'll even come and pick it up for you. You can drop it off, but if it were me, I would let them come and pick it up. So I think that that's a good first step. They will give you an actual report. Now, here's the thing. So because they are following the EPA rule, you could get a result back that does actually have lead, but if it's not at that threshold, then they legally don't have to remediate. But my personal recommendation is I still would try to move forward to figure out like what the source is, because there's no safe level of lead. But they will give you a comprehensive report from that lead test. If there is an instance where your results come back and you do have elevated lead, you can reach out to MLGW directly and to inquire about this new pilot program that they have. There are some stipulations around who qualifies. But even beyond that, if for some reason like you don't qualify for this new pilot, that will give you extensive information about what are your next steps forward. They have recommendations like for plumbers that specialize in doing replacement. So those would be my recommended next steps. And then the biggest thing is to get a filter. Not all water filters are created equal. Not to advertise for a particular brand, but I will say this: zero water filters are the filters that they used in Flint, Michigan. So you can take that how you want to take it. So they are really, really strong. They really, really do a good job. I personally use zero water filters. I don't even have lead service lines. I live downtown, but I still use them. So I would say do that as well in the interim if you do have a result that comes back with lead.
Okay.
Yeah,
We've got,
LaTricea, I use a zero water filter in my house and my family loves it.
Yes, it makes the water taste like Fiji. Memphis water is always delicious, but it makes it taste like Fiji water or something. It's so crisp, but
Yeah, it's great.
I'm addicted to it.
I have a request here to share your contact information again, if you
Oh,
can.
yes. Yes. I can actually just type it here in the chat box too, so that folks can copy and paste it.
I don't think our viewers can see
Oh, okay.
the chat box, or
Oh,
maybe
okay.
not,
Then I
I
will
don't know
share
if
my
they can or
screen.
not.
I don't think they can. I just realized that too. So I will share my screen. Oops. Again, so that we can get that all squared away. So here we go.
There it is.
There we go.
And then finally, I just wanted to make sure that you had this feedback. It's about the quiz that you use.
Yeah.
That there are 5 questions, and the highest that you can, so you can only get the highest value you can get is 15 apparently. And
Oh,
so
that was my bad. I apologize for that.
okay.
I think somebody said that they got 15. So, ooh, if that's the case, I think I read that correctly. I would recommend, and I want to make sure that you have, oops, sorry if this makes you a little dizzy. I do want to make sure, yeah. So if you go to MLGW's website, they have all the information for you to get a free water testing kit. This is really great that MLGW provides this. We work in other parts of the country, and not all water utility providers has free testing. So MLGW actually has their own lab, which is also really cool. So they're also able to do a better turnaround because they don't have to outsource all of their samples. So just want to put that out there. And sorry about that. The quiz was supposed to be quick and easy. My apologies for that with the math not mathing. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I've got other questions here that have come up. Okay, so the same person says her 1954 lead pipes were corroded and broken. Does this increase my lead exposure?
So if they were corroded and broken, so with the corrosion part, because there's an anti-corrosive in there, it lessens the risk, but it doesn't exclude. So it still could leach. If it's also broken, that means that the line is disturbed. So it actually increases the amount of lead that goes into the actual drinking water. So I would my personal recommendation would be to try to get that resolved. In the interim, please get a zero water filter. Now, key thing to note is typically like with those filters, you can get them like at the source, like at the spout. You can also get like the big canisters, like, you know, so that you can like drink freely. Now, where it gets a little bit hairy is in the bathroom. Now what you could do, because they typically don't have like a fixture which you can put it at the source in the bathroom. What I would recommend, like if you're like, of course, like brushing your teeth, you might just want to get like a cup that you can do like a quick like rinse with in the interim until you know you figure out what the status is with the drinking water at the source inside of the home.
Okay. And one last question regarding the bill to disapprove the lead efforts. What else could any of us do to try to block it?
So right now we have reached out to the Environmental Defense Fund, Earth Justice, and NRDC. Those are your big green organizations that can really put the pressure on to see what their strategy is. But the biggest thing is, and we've already done this, we reached out to Congressman Cohen's office to ask, you know, his office, what are they going to do to be on the immediate defense? Now, we do have some relationships with some other members of Congress, but since this is like our congressional person, we did immediately try to get some insight. But the biggest thing is like it's going to take a concerted effort from everybody to probably do some phone banks and call in people's offices to get them to make sure that they don't vote on it. Now, it's only introduced, so it has to go to committee. So we're not even sure if it's going to go to the floor. So it's very early right now, but what I can do is once I hear back from some of our partners to hear strategy, specifically like with Earth Justice, because they're the legal people, they're the law people. And I'll be happy to follow up with what those recommended efforts and strategies are. But right now,
Okay,
you can still reach out to Congressman Cohen to put him on notice so he can know like your constituents are very concerned about this bill.
absolutely. Well, that's it for the questions. And I just want to thank you very much for doing this. And I'm going to turn it back over to Eric to wrap this up. Thank you, LaTricea.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a really informative presentation. As someone whose family lives about 20 minutes from Flint, Michigan, it was interesting to hear the current state, if you will, of what's going on up there. So I know it's been really a generational issue that's having to be addressed, and it's certainly not fixed overnight. But well, again, thank you so much, and thank you for viewing and joining us tonight. We appreciate it. Again, our first event in the 2025 Restoration Series presented by Brother International Corporation is this Saturday. And we would love to have you join us out there. The details can be found on the calendar page on our website, wolfriver.org. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next time.